The intensity of hostilities in the Kherson region is increasing. Ukraine has important plans for the Kherson region. Russian army occupied this region long time ago. Knowing that Kherson is very important for Ukraine, the Russian army continues to keep the defense blocks in this region very strong. Ukraine wants to advance in the region by breaking the defense blocks formed by the Russian army, by providing Ukraine with space to move in the region. The strategies implemented by the Ukrainian army in Kherson so far have worked. With the pressure it created in the Kherson region, it managed to reduce the density of Russian troops in Avdiivka. Ukrainian forces managed to slow down Russia's operations in the north and south of Avdiivka, with the operations carried out in Horlivka and Kherson region. The Russian army, which was distracted by the operations of the Ukrainian army in the Kherson region, carried out many unsuccessful operations in the Avdiivka region. The Ukrainian advance in Kherson and the failed Russian operations in Avdiivka have demotivated and demoralized the Russian soldiers. One of the most important things in the war is the belief and motivation of the soldiers on the front line. Soldiers who lose their enthusiasm and motivation are doomed to lose on the front line. The Ukrainian army knows that the Kherson region is the most important road to Crimea. With the increase in the counterattack operations of the Ukrainian army in the Kherson region, Zelensky's statement, "The war started in Crimea, it will end in Crimea," comes to mind. Ukrainian forces successfully captured the bridgehead around Krinky and created a field of action in this area. Sending more troops to these areas, the Ukrainian army continued to increase its defense and firepower in the region. As in Avdiivka, the Ukrainian army wants to control the forest areas around Kherson. Deploying troops in the forest region is a very important detail to better protect the region and to take control of visibility. In order to create a foothold here, the Ukrainians organized counterattack operations targeting Russian troops and attacked Russian positions in the forest region. The Ukrainian army is wearing down the defense blocks formed by the Russian army with its operations. The Ukrainian army organized offensive operations against the Russian positions and captured some positions. The Russian army also tried to take back the positions it lost in order not to remain inactive in this region. The Russian army organizing offensive operations against Ukrainian positions failed. The Ukrainian army reacted very quickly to the Russian attacks and destroyed the armored vehicles. The Ukrainian army organized attack operations with unmanned aerial vehicles in the region and destroyed Russian troops. Russians suffered great losses in the region. The Ukrainian army also destroyed a Russian tank in the region. The Ukrainian army is conducting reconnaissance operations in the region and organizing attack operations against the Russian targets it detected. Ukrainian reconnaissance teams are tracking moving Russian targets while hitting Russian gathering areas and ammunition depots in the region. Ukrainian forces also destroyed a truck loaded with ammunition on the eastern side of the Kherson region with an operation. In the eastern part of Kherson, Ukrainians continue to carry out offensive operations with drones, targeting Russian positions and routes used by the Russians. The Ukrainian offensive in and near Krinky is making the Russian commanders very nervous. There is a Russian logistics network near Krinky. Knowing that it is very easy to attack the routes used by the Russians for logistics with drones, Russian troops state that Russian logistics dominance in the region is in danger. Ukrainian troops have managed to wear down the Russian troops with the long-standing offensive operations carried out by Ukrainian troops near Krinky. The firepower of the Russians in the region has weakened considerably. The Ukrainian army is constantly reinforcing the attack teams in the region. However, the Russian army cannot send reinforcements to the region. For this reason, Russian troops are too worn out to withstand Ukrainian attacks. Russian soldiers complained that not enough troops were sent to the Kherson region and that they had been fighting in the region for too long. With the arrival of the winter months, conditions became very difficult. Weather conditions can be very challenging for soldiers on the front line. Snow, rain, and cold weather can be fatal for soldiers who are constantly fighting on the front line. For this reason, it is unacceptable to have the same military units on the front line without rotation. Russian soldiers also complain that there is no rotation in the Kherson region and that they have to constantly fight on the front line. Fighting with demoralized troops will lead to failure. Russian soldiers fighting in Krinky also complained that their ammunition was very low. 80% of the soldiers fighting in unfavorable conditions were killed or wounded. Since the Ukrainian army knew that the Russians were fighting in unfavorable conditions, they increased their counterattack operations and inflicted great losses on the Russians. Russian soldiers in the region refused to carry out offensive operations and defied their commanders. Russian soldiers refused to fight, stating that the operations to be carried out in these conditions would be suicide operations. The Ukrainian army moved towards the forest region and deployed in these areas as targeted. In this way, it could easily detect the Russians who were moving in the region and trying to escape from the positions. The Ukrainian army neutralized the Russian soldiers fleeing backwards from the front line. Ukrainian forces also captured some Russian soldiers. In the battle, which continues in bad weather conditions, Ukrainian forces are organizing more reconnaissance and offensive operations to expand the field of action. Taking advantage of the Russian dispersal and the unfavorable situation on the front line, they continue to destroy Russian points. The Ukrainian army continues to send troops and equipment to the region while the Russian defense blocks continue to weaken. The Ukrainian army, which sends ammunition to the Ukrainian troops without interruption, is giving hell to the Russian troops in Kherson. If Ukrainian forces manage to advance a little further in the region, they will be able to physically cut the highway along the river that connects the Russian forces in the north and south. If this happens, the Ukrainian army will gain a huge strategic advantage in the region. Russians are very afraid of this situation. The Ukrainian army is cautious and continues its offensive operations without losing control in the region. The fighting on the Kherson front is not as intense as in Avdiivka, Marinka and Bakhmut, but the fighting in the region continues. The Ukrainian army does not want to organize offensive operations in the Kherson region as intensively as Russia did in Avdiivka. As a result, the Russians lost a large number of their soldiers and equipment in Avdiivka. Nevertheless, they could not win a major victory in Avdiivka. Having analyzed this situation well, the Ukrainians are acting more cautiously in Kherson. Do you think the Ukrainian army will be able to repel the Russians in the Kherson region towards Crimea? However, a meeting of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief Staff was held in Ukraine the other day. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made some statements about the front line. There were of course reports from commanders on all fronts. Special attention was paid to the Donetsk direction, Avdiivka, Marinka, the Bakhmut area, said the head of the state. The president specifies that these areas witnessed the most intense combat clashes in the past day. I thank all our warriors for their strength and resilience. The Kupiansk region, I want to particularly highlight the holding of our positions there. We also discussed our actions in the southern fronts, Zelensky shared. What do you think about the developments on the Kherson front and Zelensky's statements on the front line? Do you think the Ukrainian army will be able to retake the Kherson front from the Russians and advance towards Crimea? You can share your thoughts with us by commenting.